What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's LUMIX Live. We have a continuation this week of our topic from last stream, so last week's stream. We're going to be going over the camera menu system on the S5 Mark II, but this time specifically on the photo side of the setup. We didn't really have enough time because I kind of mismanaged the time last week to actually be able to dive into photo settings, as well as like some of the different lens settings as well in the camera. So I got my camera hooked up again, just like we did last time. So we're gonna go through that, talk about just the different ways that you can set the camera up, what the different options mean in the system. And throughout this entire time, obviously, like we always do, we're going to be taking your questions. So we'll go through a chunk of the menu, we'll stop, answer some questions, then go back into the camera menu, and then stop and go through some questions. So we'll try to keep it a little bit more on topic this week and a little more kind of on point for it. So, if you are new to these streams, these are the weekly broadcasts we do every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, where we mix either technical conversations, demonstrations, sometimes we have guests come in and we talk with them, but ultimately this entire platform is built based around you, the actual users of this equipment, being able to give you a platform to ask us questions, get answers, and not have to wade through all of the various kind of fodder that's out there in Facebook and Instagram of, you know, things that may not be actual answers to the questions you have. So, yeah, we will be kind of going through this. If you have questions, tag at LUMIX USA. I will do my best to try to get to as many of them as I can today. If we don't get through to your particular question, don't worry. We'll try to address it in the next coming weeks. Little bit of a programming note for everybody. Next week's stream and the following week's stream, so the 13th and the 20th, are both going to be pre-recorded streams. We will be out at NAB for the trade show. In fact, traveling on Thursday to get out there for setup. So we do have a stream already set, ready to go for premiere for next Thursday. That's going to be about the use of LUTs for photography. And then the following, on the 20th, we're going to be actually recording that episode during NAB. So I'll be in the booth recording a bunch of stuff, putting that together, and then we'll be premiering that because unfortunately I won't be able to do that one live. I will be in the air most likely during this time, so it'll be a little difficult. So be sure to subscribe to the channel, set your reminders. That next Thursday's video is already up. So go make sure you get yourself checked in on that. We won't be monitoring the questions live, but the chat will be open, so feel free to drop your comments and questions in that video. Anything that comes out of it as far as questions go, we will look to address on the following week's stream once we're back, so that would be the 27th. So make sure to get everything in there. We will try to reply to comments and stuff like that if you leave a comment under the video. So, what else? LUMIX Pro Services, we have LPS here in the United States. We have Red and Platinum. Red is free. Platinum gets you the added level of benefit there. So you get 2-day turnaround times on repairs, 20% off out of warranty repairs. You get access to the members hotline if you want to speak to someone in person instead of going through email and chat. You also get a pretty cool welcome kit with it, so be sure to take a look at those. We have links available in the description for both LPS in the US as well as what's available in the various different regions. So be sure to keep an eye on those web pages, check out what's available in your region, and then, yeah, you can go from there. So let's take a look real quick at some of the questions before we dive into the camera. Ruckus says, does anyone know what the name of the LUMIX USA stream is where they interview photographers using the S-series cameras and did all their edits on a tablet? I would have to go back and double check. There's been a decent number of them. Someone who edits on a tablet. Ruckus, I'll take a look back through and see if I can find it, and then I will post a comment in the video and tag you afterwards if I can find it. Yeah, most of the time they're going to be titled either creator interview or interview in the title. But down in the description, we do have the entire catalog set up. So it does have the full, God, I forget how many videos we've done at this point. You should have all of them listed there. There were some super, super early ones that were on Facebook, but those would be beginning of S series. So let's see here. Emerald, what is going on with LUMIX Pro Europe? Portal access. Honestly, I'm not sure what's up with the European or the UK LUMIX Pro. Unfortunately, I only have interactions with the US team since we're based in the US. But I would recommend, if you've got questions about it, check with general social media contacts over in LUMIX UK. I know that they have their Instagram, LUMIX UK. You check out through some of the other platforms, see if you can get in touch with someone over there. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm not sure as far as what every individual group's plan is or how they're running their LUMIX Pro program. So, sorry, Emerald. I wish I had a better answer for you. Thank you for the great show. Using your S5 Mark II with the DJI Ronin RSC2, the tracking and human detection gets turned off when using 6K or 5.9K quality settings. Is this normal? Yeah, so the S5 Mark II, when you plug in either USB, which is considered a display out because the information it's using display information, or you plug in an HDMI, the subject detection does turn off. Your focusing still works. You're still using phase detect. You can still select all the different modes. But for the time being, it is something that we've brought up to the engineers to say, hey, is this something that can be done? Initial commentary, there's a lot of processing going on when you're at 6K or anything over 4K, because now you're taking that 6K, 5.9K, so on, signal, and you are having to output that in a 4K video signal. So I'm not 100% sure if there are limitations there or if it's just a quality thing or whatever, but we have asked them to take a look at it and see if that is something that can be updated in firmware. As soon as I get more information about that, obviously we'll be talking about it here on the stream. But yeah, that's kind of how that setup goes right now. If you need to use subject tracking and things like that and you're on a gimbal, I would recommend either not using the cable connection for it for the controls, because then you can shoot 6K, have your subject detection, you don't have to worry about the external. If you're using an external monitor within 6K, that may be a little bit more of a challenge for you, but know that one area plus, the full area, all those different modes, they still do work. You're just not getting subject detection over 4K at the moment. So, kit lens or pro lens, which is better for photography? Honestly, I use both. I don't think there is... Depending on what your needs are for the optics that you're going to work with, can determine whether or not the pro lenses are going to be the primary value for you. Typically, the S Pro lenses, so all the Leica certified optics from us, are going to be, you know, your kind of the Trinity lenses, so 24-70, 70-200s, or 16-35. They do get better contrast, better color rendition. They're more unified across the board. So if you jump between a 24-70 to 70-200, the rendition is going to be very similar as far as color, tonality that you can get out of what a lens imparts onto the image. If you're jumping back and forth between S Pro and non-S Pro, you may see a slight difference there. But truthfully, from an image quality perspective, if you're an average everyday photographer, videographer, go with what focal length works best for you. Personally, for my own photography, I mix a lot of the Sigma and the LUMIX lenses together. I have access to pretty much all of it because I work for the company, so I get to play with which ones I want. But I have found myself actually being really tied to the 14-28 for my ultra wide, the f1.8 series for my kind of travel go-to kits, and then like the lens I have attached onto the camera right now for the demo, that's my 105mm macro Sigma that I have attached. So really mixing and matching lenses, gonna be cool. Really sick with it. So yeah, it's a good setup. When we use 96 megapixel, can we use flash at the moment? No. So flash does not fire in the high resolution mode because you're using electronic shutter. There is a kind of like hack that you can do, and this is true with most cameras. If you're using an electronic shutter, you can manually fire a flash, though you'd have to be pretty quick to do it. And you run into the issues of the flash duration not matching with the sync speed of the sensor readout. So you can do it and get some cool creative effect, but high resolution shot does not support flash at the moment. So with that, let's actually jump into the camera and kind of go through these. So like I said, this week we're going to talk specifically about the photography menu options here. So we've got a lot of pages to go through, but I also want to make sure, and I'm actually going to do this first. I want to hit on something that I've seen online about people asking questions about when you're adapting EF lenses onto the Micro Four Thirds system. Not Micro Four Thirds, when you're mounting EF lenses onto the S5 through something like the MC21. And that is the question about how when the camera is saying that it's quote unquote in focus, that you're still seeing some some issues where maybe it's not truly in focus. The focus plane might actually be a little bit forward or a little behind your subject. And as we move forward with more modern cameras that are adapting older lenses, we've now kind of come full circle with phase detect autofocusing systems. And what that means is that with all lenses, especially native lens or excluding native lenses that are built for the system for the camera, there are chances that the lens that you have may not be properly calibrated for where the focus point is. It's kind of hard to describe outside of you get a confirmation of where focus is, but your lens may still actually need to be micro adjusted to actually get it into the proper point to where it should be focusing. And this can be seen with older optics. So what we've added in the S5 Mark II, and this is going to be in phase detect cameras, you'll see this in pretty much, as far as I've seen, pretty much all phase detect cameras have this. You have the ability to come in here and do micro adjust, and you can do this a couple of ways. You can do it by lens or by all lenses. If you're mixing and matching lenses that you work with, you want to do this by lens. You don't really want to do this necessarily for kind of all lenses if you're going to be mixing, because you may throw off other lenses. But AF Micro Adjust, what this allows you to do is actually come in and program in the kind of offsets that you need for how the lens should be working. Now, because I'm using a lens that is actually L mount and it's designed for it, you see here that it says, hey, I already know what this lens is. I know what the micro adjust should be on it, so there's not anything I need to do for this. But if I attach a lens that does not have, a profile built in, or it's a lens that can be adjusted, you can go in here and you can shift and actually micro adjust your lens to allow it and say, hey, this lens has a tendency to front focus, so I want to, when I have this plugged in, go in and actually adjust that as like an offset to correct that focus distance. It's something that you'll start to see, it really shouldn't come up too often. You'll see it more with lenses that may be a bit old, or, you've kind of used them for a long time, or they've been banged around in a bag. But yeah, for the most part, L-mount lenses themselves, like I said, I've got this Sigma 105 macro here. If I go in and I said, hey, tell me what this lens is, 105mm f2.8 macro, it's the DG, it's the Art series, it has a profile built in, it knows where the focus point should be, it knows what the calibration for that lens is, because one, it's a native L-mount and it's a first-party optic. Other lenses you may see have some other slight little challenges with it. So if you're running into some issues like that where your focus is just slightly off, be sure to take a look at AF Micro Adjust or Lens Adjust here. And you should be able to correct anything there. And again, this is because lenses have variance in them between what the camera's designed for, what the lens is designed for, the adapter that you're using in this case. We made sure that you have this tool in there to actually fine-tune the positioning for you. So now that we're past that, let's dive into the photo menus. So like we've said before, there are a ton of options in the camera, specifically for both photo and video, that give you near infinite control over what you want to have the camera do for you, how you want the camera to react while you're using it. And just because I have certain settings set up in here for the way I shoot, clearly that does not mean that these are the ways that may work best for you. These are just recommendations, things that I have found that for my style of shooting, which is landscape, street photography, but then also some faster action photography with motorcycles. These, use this as kind of a guideline to be able to understand what these options are. So starting right off the top, we've got our photo style options here in the S5 Mark II. This is where you've got access to the entire range of your different options available. So the different color profiles, everything by default is shown here. You do have options to a couple of hidden color profiles that are really more into the video side, so they won't really show up here in the stills. But couple things to note when you work with the photo styles. One, coming into it through this menu. So again, coming into the actual main camera menu, so pressing menu set, coming into the photo option, page 1. This is where you have that ability to control and change the different settings for your color profiles. In my case, I also have all of my photo color styles set up because I have LUTs applied to them for my JPEG work. But we're going to talk very specifically about that next week on the stream, about how to set those up, what happens, things you need to be aware of. But just know that if you're a photographer and you want to work with LUTs, you want to use the My Photo Style options here to actually set up your different looks by applying a LUT to it. I do not recommend as a photographer using the real-time LUT option because you are baked into using the actual vlog as a base color profile. So if you're someone who shoots RAW plus JPEG, just keep that in the back of your mind, because when you shoot RAW with vlog, it's not going to give you the result that you're looking for if you needed to edit that RAW file in post later. So one of the next things here you'll see is we have the different profiles like we said, but this is where you will also notice that your native ISOs can change depending on the color profile you work with. So Cinelike D2, Cinelike V2, they have a different base ISO range. Vlog has a different ISO range. And so do the hybrid log gammas. So it's kind of making sure that you're kind of setting up its profile and the ISOs the way you want them to kind of work. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're working with the different color profiles. Let's see here. I saw a couple questions come in. Sigma DG HSM art lens needed MC21 SAL adapter really needed for better AF. If you're using an SA version of the HSM lenses, yes. You want to make sure you're using an MC21. Be careful when you're looking at the adapters that you want to buy, because there are two L-mount adapters from Sigma. One of them is EF to L. The other is SA to L. EF to L, which is the one I have here, is for EF mount lenses. SA to L is for Sigma's proprietary SA mount that they used for a number of years. And there are lenses that you can find from the DG HSM series that may be SA mount. They might not be EF mount. And the mounts look at first visual glance very similar. So make sure you're getting the right adapter. But if you're using HSM lenses, yes, I would highly recommend you go with the MC21. Don't go with another third-party adapter that may be making one for it, because this adapter communicates to the camera what the lens is and the profile information so that our system knows what to do with it when you're mounting. Why does it use auto exposure when you're trying to focus? Does it do it when you're burst in AF? This is actually something that when we kind of go through the menus here, this can hopefully kind of explain a little bit of that. So depending on the mode that you use for a couple of different things can change how the camera's going to work for the focusing kind of activity, right? So how it works. Anyone that's ever worked with a phase detect system knows that when these systems demand light, the more light you can provide to it, the better and more accurate a phase detect system can work. It's why most cameras out there in the market have a limit as to how stop down you can make the lens go, before it converts back to the contrast system, or they have a certain low end luminance level where it has to revert back to contrast. This is true for all mirrorless brands that are using phase detect hybrid autofocusing systems. Our system, what we do to kind of counteract that and to give you more flexibility with it is when you are using continuous AF, you'll actually see the lens kind of open up and let as much light in to get you that focus, and then it will stop back down. So in some cases, depending on whether or not you have continuous or constant preview turned on or off, you may see the image bloom and then come back. This is, when you're working in SAF, it's more visible because you're only focusing once and then stopping. When you're focusing in continuous AF, you'll see it potentially on the first shot, but this can also depend on your exposure settings. And whether or not you have, say, like exposure, aperture preview turned on through constant preview. These little differences can change how the image is displayed for you. So a couple things here would be like to look, say, under your metering modes, which is the next option down, you know, picking the metering mode that works best for you, that you know how you want to work with the camera, and recognize what it's going to do to each of those shots or the way the image is captured. By default, your cameras are all going to ship with the evaluative or full area metering. I typically, because I grew up shooting on film, where center weighted was the primary used kind of metering option here, that's usually where I have my camera set. But we also have two other modes here. We have highlight spot metering as well as just standard spot metering. So standard spot metering, if I move the point around, it's going to give me a metered exposure based on the middle there. If I change this into, say, highlight spot, it's going to use the brightest part in the image and make sure that it doesn't actually kind of overexpose that. And as we see here with my macro lens, because I'm working right at near the closest focus here, you'll see that the image goes very, very gray. And that's because if you look in the back corner of the frame here, and I'll use this to move up here so I can direct where I want you to look. If you look up here in the corner, that color checker that's in the background just went like really kind of flat gray. It's not really properly exposed. Where if I come in and I change this metering mode to, say, back to evaluative metering or center weighted, you notice that that background now gets really bright. You really kind of see it, and then now the LUMIX logo is also super white there. So these are going to give you very different kind of effects. Know which one you're using. This also, like I said, will change the way that you see the focusing system show when you're actually engaging focus for the system. So outside of metering modes here, next down we have the aspect ratios on this system. Now, with our aspect ratios, the way we work with them in the S series cameras is actually somewhat of a very different way that pretty much everybody else does. So we have the option for 4x3, 3x2, 16x9, 1:1, 65x24, and 2:1. So the way we do this that's different than pretty much everybody else is that no matter which one of these you choose, if you are capturing RAW with the camera, you are still getting the full 3x2 aspect ratio image out of the sensor. Your RAW file will still be 3x2. But what this does is this tells the software that you're using for editing the RAW files, hey, this needs to be cropped to 4x3, 3x2, 16x9, 1:1, so on and so forth. This makes it actually a lot more useful, in my opinion, to use aspect ratios when you're actually out in the field. You can use like a crazy aspect ratio like 65x24, which is going to be a much more ultra wide kind of frame, because it's designed after the old logic of, think like the X-Pan and cameras like that, where you've got two 35mm frames side by side, so you get an ultra wide field of view. So this gives you that kind of whole setup to be able to still capture that way, but that RAW file gets saved as the full image area 3x2. As Sean is asking here, 1:1, is that a full sensor readout? No, it's actually not in this, because these are aspect ratios. So the natural aspect ratio of a 35mm full frame camera is 3:2. So if we look at 3:2, you'll see right now I've got my aspect ratio to 3:2. We see it. It's in the full 3:2 aspect. But if I come back into the menu and I change this to 1:1, now you see that I've got a square image that I'm going to be capturing. Now this just shows in the JPEG. So if you are shooting RAW plus JPEG, your JPEG will be the squared aspect ratio that you see down below. The RAW file will still have all of the information of 3:2. It'll just be flagged to crop in to that 1:1 or whatever aspect ratio you chose. So what I think is kind of really cool about this is that it lets you go around and play with these different aspect ratios. As I can see, someone already pointed out there, loved being able to shoot with 65:24. It's a really fun aspect ratio to shoot with. There are some limitations. High resolution shot mode, you can't use 65:24 or 2:1. When you have an HDMI attached to it, like I do for demonstration, I can't display that out. But that gives you still a lot of flexibility. It's rare that as a photographer, you're going to have an HDMI attached to the camera, so usually really doesn't come into a big deal. And then in high resolution shot mode, it doesn't allow you to select it out of the box. Because one, you're really in a small cropped area of it, and your RAW file is still going to be the full 3:2, so you still would just be cropping 65:24 in post in like Lightroom or Photoshop. So small little differences there. If you see something grayed out on a menu, you can always click on it. It'll tell you like, hey, why can't this be selected? In this case, because of drive burst mode. And actually I was incorrect there before. I apologize. I can use 65:24 with HDMI. And you see that you just get that very kind of severe, kind of crop in an image. So if I come in and bring my exposure compensation up just so you can see the actual bands there, you see that you get that, kind of cool cinematic look. If I come down, go to 2:1, you see you get a little bit taller, and then so on and so forth. Yeah, this can be a lot of fun to kind of play around with. 16:9, because I'm out over HDMI, is going to show you 16:9. 3:2 is going to show you pillar boxed because it has to output it in a it basically is going to have to put it into a 16:9 aspect ratio to output it over HDMI. Let's see. I definitely want to address this one here. Let's be honest, all you need is f1.8 or higher aperture lenses to shoot good photos. I vehemently disagree with you. You do not need fast lenses to capture good photos. You need a good eye and you need good technique. It is a wild misconception in the market, in the photo industry these days, that the only good lenses are fast aperture lenses. So f1.8, 1.4, 1.2s, maybe f2s. The truth is, any lens you put in front of your camera, you can create an amazing photograph with. So I do not recommend taking the logic that you have to buy fast glass or, you're not going to be able to get good photos. Any lens you put in it, if you put the time and the effort into learning technique, you can create some amazing photos. Most of the photos created that we all kind of covet and look at, if you go out there and you look, people are buying 1.8 lenses and you're shooting at f5.6. Kind of tells you there. So sorry for that little rant. I have to address that one because that's actually a pet peeve of mine coming up through photography. So moving on, photo quality. In the camera, we've got plenty of options for photo quality in here, what we call photo quality. And this is just quite simply RAW, JPEG, RAW plus JPEG, how you want that combination to go. Fine gives you the kind of highest quality JPEG. Standard gives you a little bit lower quality, so it's a little bit higher compression so that you can get more photos onto your card. And then there's the RAW combinations of this. So RAW plus fine, RAW plus standard, and then just standard RAW. So you've got a ton of different, kind of flexible options here with it. Know that the RAW files out of the S5 Mark II are 14-bit, so you're going to get tons of flexibility in post for pushing and pulling your shadows. Your JPEGs, remember JPEGs are 8-bit, so not as much flexibility to push a JPEG. But if you're someone who likes to work, like in my opinion, like how I work with real-time LUT and photography, I will always shoot everything RAW plus JPEG, and that gives me that chance that I have an image that I'm super happy with right out of camera. Awesome. I can send that to my phone, work with it. I'm happy. But if I do want to edit it later, I can then bring it into Photoshop, Lightroom Mobile on my device or whatever, and then I can actually do full-blown editing to it. If you're curious about working with real-time LUT for stills capture, make sure to watch next week's stream that we've got recorded, because I go in depth on that, how to create them, how to load them onto the camera, things you want to be aware of, and what color profiles you want to work with, and where the benefits are. So make sure to check out that stream next week on that one. Let's go back a little bit. Let's cover couple more of these on this page, on these next pages here, and then we'll jump back in with some of the questions. Picture size, just another way to tell the camera what resolution you want the image actually coming out of the camera to be. By default, 24 megapixel, that's large. 6000 by 4000, that's going to get you the highest quality of your JPEG out of the camera. And then you have medium and small. Think of these as just other ways to either increase the photo count that you have on the card, or also ways to kind of adjust what resolution where you need this JPEG to go. One thing that you'll notice is that if you set the camera just to RAW, you don't have picture size as an option, because picture size only applies to the JPEGs. So, you know, kind of keep that in thought if you're looking to play around with picture size. It's only going to affect the JPEG image, not your RAW image. Your RAW image is always going to be 6000 by 4000 in 3x2 in 14-bit RAW, no matter what you select on this under the picture size options. Next up, we've got high-resolution shot mode. On the S5 Mark II, the high-resolution shot mode is designed for use on a tripod. We do not advertise it or claim that it can be used for handheld. If you need handheld high-resolution shot, that's where the GH6 comes in. But this gives you full options and full selections here for the different RAW file sizes. If you want to capture an original standard 24 megapixel with it, how you want the motion blur processing to be done, whether you want it to let the motion blur kind of show through or have it, try to compensate for that. As well as your shutter delay. So if you don't have a shutter release, or you didn't set up the Bluetooth on your phone with your camera to give you a remote, you have an option to put in your shutter delay. Now, we've talked about it before, but picture quality in this particular menu allows you to come in and independently set what your high-resolution shot settings are for picture quality. If you were to select combined, this is going to use what you have set here. If I hit the wrong button, there you go. If you set combined under high resolution shot mode or mode settings, it will use what you have selected on this particular screen. So I have RAW plus fine. But if we come in here and select any of these others here, so fine, RAW plus fine, or RAW, that's going to override, and it will only save out in a high resolution shot what you select on this menu. So if you know that for high res shot, you only ever want the RAW files, you don't care about the JPEGs, you can independently just set this to say, okay, high resolution shot, only save the RAW file. I don't care about the JPEG. But if I'm not in high resolution shot, I still want my JPEG with me. So gives you more control. If you ever notice all of a sudden you're like, why do I not have my high resolution shot JPEG? Just double check this menu, make sure that it's either set to combined or RAW plus fine. That'll give you a good indication. Next up, we've got long exposure noise reduction. Anyone that does long exposure photography or anything over typically about a second long, there are two trains of thought when it comes to using this option in the camera. By default, we have this turned on. Long exposure noise reduction is in some cases also considered black frame removal. So what our camera will do is, say you take a 16-second exposure, it will do a second exposure in a black frame at 16 seconds under the same setup that you've done, to then identify where any kind of noise is present or hot or stuck pixels are present, and then it maps that onto the image and it knows, okay, hey, in the actual full color image or black and white image, whatever it is that you're capturing, there are hot or stuck pixels here, 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 and here. Mask them out. It knows where it is. The reason why I say there are two trains of thought on this is that in one, it means that a 16-second exposure now becomes a 32-second exposure time total because you're doubling up for the timeline. Some people are fine with that. I'm one of those people. I would much rather have the camera do it, and I don't have any issues with noise or hot or stuck pixels in post. But if you're someone who needs to work really fast, say like, maybe you're working on a time lapse and you're going to be doing really long exposures for the time lapse. In some cases, it could be faster to not use long exposure noise reduction internally and then do it in software. So in Photoshop, Lightroom, the different time lapse softwares out there that can do hot and stuck pixel removal or noise reduction, things like that. So you kind of have to pick which one is going to be best for you, which path is going to be best for you. Know that when you do it in camera, it's actually embedded in the file. It knows where those hot and stuck pixels are, so you're not going to see them in post. Word of advice or word of comment to everybody, all digital sensors have hot and stuck pixels. I don't care what any fanboy says about it one way or another. They all have it. It is just something that happens with sensors. You can always do pixel refresh and stuff like that to try to clear some of them out. But it is a common thing on pretty much all digital sensors to varying different levels and what the brand has done to correct them just out of the box. Next up, we have dual native ISO. In stills mode, you do have access to dual native ISOs. By default, your camera is going to ship with this set to auto. But you do have the option to come in and set your different ranges. Now, this ties back to the color profiles that we were talking about. So if I go here and say I'm in standard and I hit my ISO button, you'll see that my lowest ISO before the camera goes into low or extended range is 100. So that would be my base ISO for the low range in standard color profiles. But then if I come in here and I change my color profile to, let's change this to Cinelike D2. It's another popular color profile people use from the still side. Now, if I come in and I hit my ISO button, you'll see that my low ISO is now 200. And then again, if I go back in and I go to Vlog, which again, I do not recommend shooting Vlog for stills. If I go into here, I hit my ISO, you'll see that my low range is 640. So you'll see very different ISO ranges between the different color profiles that you work with. So you have the option to go around and change that. If you want to go to high, it'll tell you what the lowest number before you go to the L or the E, or L or H. Those are going to be able to tell you where your base ISOs are, which is going to get you the best noise to shadow or noise to image quality performance or signal to noise ratio. So you get the most dynamic range, you'll get the most flexibility out of it if you stay at those numbers. And you'll also notice that if you're in the stills mode and working in standard, those ranges are much closer than they are in Vlog. So you're 100 and 640. So if you're setting your ISO up and it's looking like, it's calling for like 500 ISO, you're probably better off just going up to 640 or 800 as your next ISO range, and you'll get a cleaner file that has more flexibility to push and pull it in post. Let's see here. A couple of comments now that we're done through the first page here. Where was it? The light metering that shows on the viewfinder doesn't show on screen. Any change for that in the future? Not sure what you mean the difference in there. I can take a look at the different meters that show up between the viewfinder and the rear screen, and yeah, let you know. I'm getting ready to pre-order the S5 Mark II X, and I'm looking forward to when that drops. Own a GH6 and hope they will play nice together in a multicam live broadcast. They totally should. The S5 Mark II X, as we had mentioned, is basically everything. It's everything you've seen in S5 Mark II, but just up to that next level for video, and it's going to add the really cool options for wired and wireless IP streaming. So if you're doing multicam and stuff like that, should be pretty sick. And they're on similar platforms, not identical platforms, but yeah, they're going to play really nice together. I've played with both Mark II and the GH6 together, and they're awesome. Yeah. Let's see here. Just got in, so not sure if I asked. Can ETC reach boost mode? Reach boost mode be used in stills mode? If so, will you show how to set up and activate it? I think you mean the external teleconverter mode. I can take a look at it. I rarely ever used that, even in the other cameras, but we can go through and kind of play with that because we are going to go past that in the menu and talk about it a little bit. Let's see here. Can you force internal camera fan to turn on to reduce long exposure noise, or is the fan turned on automatically? This one I actually will cover quick. So you do 100% have the ability to manually adjust the fan in the camera. I just have to remember where it is because I rarely ever go in and touch it. Is it under custom? Yeah, so you do have the option to come in here and turn the fan on. You can set it up to fast if you want. It's going to give you the warnings normally that, like, hey, you're probably going to hear the fan when you've got it running on full. But yeah, you can 100% turn the fan on. By default, the camera's going to come in auto too, which means that it'll turn on when it needs to. Are you going to see an appreciable difference in noise with it on at full or off? You might. It kind of depends on how long of an exposure you're working with. If anyone does long exposure, you know that as your camera heats up, you see more noise, you see more chances of hot and stuck pixels. Keeping a sensor cool and everything kind of at a lower temperature is going to give you better shadow noise and things like that. So you do have some capability there for it. So yeah, you can 100% turn the fan on full blast if you want. For astrophotography, is it possible to save out the dark frame from long shutter noise reduction so you can use them as dark frames in stacking software? Unfortunately, no. We don't save out the black frame. What you could do in a case like that is literally just take a black frame on the camera, throw the cap on, do the same exposure that you're planning to do, capture a single black frame because it's going to cause the same noise that the black frame recording does. And then you will have that both in RAW and JPEG if you want. So that would be one workaround. Maybe I'd say, you do that first and, kind of set your shot up. That won't account for as you're shooting longer and longer, the camera heating up. So with something like that, I'd recommend maybe capturing a whole bunch of images. Then when you have an opportunity after you've been using the camera for a while, then create a black frame, save that out, and then continue shooting. Let's see here. It'd be great if the menus that you can configure to display when you press menu could be divided into pages, one for photography, one for video. So yeah, there's two thought processes for the way these menus are set up. There's more than two, but our logic is that when you are changing the mode dial on the camera for photo to video, that is your change between photo and video modes and options. Right now I'm in photo. If I change the camera into the video mode here and the camera, my switcher syncs up with it, you'll see now that I don't have access to the photo menu options anymore. But if I go back into the photo modes, now when I go into the menu, I have my options again. So yeah, you do have it. My photo menu, it is a little different. You can save out different my menu options, user 1, user 2, or page 1, page 2, and page 3. Typically, that's how I would set mine up if I wanted to use that, but I rarely ever have to go into the menu. Cool. Okay. So ISO sensitivity, this is where you can set your upper and lower range on the S5 Mark II. So let's brighten this back up so we can see a little bit better. If you are ever setting your camera up in auto ISO, if that's how you want to work with the camera, which is often actually how I work a lot of times with the camera now, you have the ability to set your low range as well as your high range. Now, what you'll notice is that right now, this is saying, like, my high range can only be 800. Well, that's because on the page above this, I'm setting ISO low. If I change this to high, come down to sensitivity, you'll see I can now set my high ISO range up to whatever I'm comfortable with. depending on how you use your camera from a photographer's perspective, obviously set these what works best for you. But auto ISO is what allows you to do your minimum shutter speed options here. So if I set my camera into aperture priority, I've got my camera set to aperture priority. Because I'm in a certain color profile, it automatically goes back into what I had my stuff set up for. But if I come down, go to auto ISO, we've got it here. When I come in, you'll see that I have the ability to come in and set my actual minimum shutter speed now based on the settings that I've got. This will react specifically with ISO settings to tell you, okay, hey, what is your upper limit? What are you comfortable with the ISO going up to? What are you comfortable with it staying down low at? And then it will program in everything so that now my ISO will only go up to a certain number depending on the shutter speed that I'm selecting. This is how I do any of my more kind of faster action photography with it. I set it in auto ISO. I set 6400 as my high, 100 as my low, 2,000th of a second as my shutter speed. And then just, let it kind of go through there. Next up on this menu, we've got iDynamic. If you are shooting JPEG, iDynamic will have an effect on your images. If you're shooting RAW, it won't. iDynamic is not a way to get better dynamic range. It is only a way to have the camera try to adjust your highlight and shadow curves dynamically. Hence the name Intelligent Dynamic Range. Even though it says dynamic range in it, this isn't actually altering anything for dynamic range. It is just trying to get the camera to give you curves for your highlights and shadows that balance the exposure out. So you're actually losing contrast when you use this because it's going to be kind of mixing it so that you don't have really high blown out highlights and really crushed down deep shadows. So while yes, technically you could say that's dynamic range, it's not actually changing anything about the dynamic range that's possible on the camera, and it only applies to the JPEG images. So if you want just more of like kind of a point and shoot level of control where you just literally take the camera, click the button, you're good to go, and you're only looking at JPEGs, sure, iDynamic can be a useful tool. But if you're going to work with RAW files, I would just... Truthfully, I would ignore this because I rarely ever see benefit, and in raw files, you're not actually going to see anything there. Vignetting compensation, exactly what it says that it does. It is a vignetting compensation. It knows the profile of the lens that you've got attached, and it applies a correction for the vignetting on the lens, bakes that into the footage. Most of the software that you use when you bring it into something like Lightroom or Photoshop or anything like that will know and already have a profile built in for that lens as to what the vignetting looks like on it to correct for it. This lets you do it to the camera and have it embed in the metadata so that the system knows, hey, I applied this to the particular image. Color shading compensation. We talked about this a little bit before. Color shading compensation, this is so that you can actually have the peripheral parts of the image, so your edges, actually be able to kind of adjust the tint and tone that you get out of those corners. Some lenses produce a very specific look, and if you want to have another lens match that as far as what the shading looks like on the edges, we've added the ability for you to come in and tweak that as well. So you can come in and adjust the red tint and the blue tint to kind of get your lenses to kind of closely-ish match. Diffraction compensation. All lenses and all sensor formats eventually have a point where you stop down enough and you start introducing diffraction into the image. What we've built into the camera is with lenses that we know what the optical characteristics are of them, we're able to apply intelligent levels of sharpening to correct for diffraction. This can be useful. Again, this is really primarily more of something that you're going to see on the JPEGs, not necessarily the RAW files. But yeah, this just gives you a little bit more usability for stopping down. It used to be that if you're doing landscapes, people always told you stop down to f/22 and you're going to get the best looking image ever. And while, yes, you get a lot of things in focus, you actually soften your image a lot. This can kind of help bring that back a little bit. It's not going to be a perfect fix for that. But it ends up correcting a lot of it so that you can get a couple more stops of useful kind of sharpness in your depth of field the more you stop a lens down. Filter settings, we talked about this on the video side. Filter effects, these are all of the different effects like expressive, retro, old days, high key, low key, so on and so forth. These will be applied just to the JPEG images in the camera. You won't have these get applied to the RAW file. But you also have the ability with our camera to say, hey, you know, I like this retro, but I also want to be able to have this record without the filter. Typically, you're only going to see this when you have the camera set just to JPEG. If you are shooting RAW plus JPEG, you always have one that does not have that filter effect applied to it because you have your RAW file. Next one down, AF detection settings here. Depending on what you've got set up here, because I was in manual focus, or I'm in continuous now. If I set this back to continuous here, say we're on that color checker in the back here. If I come in, this is where I can manually turn on subject detection, just another option in the menu. The detection options, animal, human and eye, face and eye, and then just human. Quick word on this, face and eye detect is literally just face and eye. It is literally just your face and eye. If you turn and the camera can't see your face or eye and it can't determine where it is, it jumps back to whatever the mode is that you have the camera set up as for standard, you know, kind of what I have typically called a fallback AF mode. So keep that in mind if you're looking at this. For what I do, because I turn my head a lot, I move around a lot, I have my camera typically either set on human or human and animal, because that's going to allow it to jump. If it can't find my eyes, it'll jump to my head. If my head is obscured, it's going to jump to body. And you will get all of those different options available for you when you use that particular mode. Next up here, we've got the AF custom settings. If you want to hear a detailed, in-depth look at this, make sure to take a look at our AF custom settings video that we premiered a couple of weeks ago. I go in-depth on these settings and what they mean and how to use them. Focus limiter. We talked about this before as well. Focus limiter lets me come in, manually come through, select a focus range, and say, hey, all right, I like this particular one, so I want to lock that in as one of my focus points. I want to go all the way back in, or out to the back here, and I'm manually focusing this because you have to manually focus this to program it. Come in here, we're going to set this to my other range here. Now that means that that is the range that this camera can actually focus in, and where it's basically going to put software limits on the focusing points and where you want the system to actually be looking. So you have a couple of options there for working with this, depending on how you want to work with the camera. Next up, AF assist light. Literally, this is just that red light that shines on the front of the camera that assists the autofocusing system. Focus peaking. This is a new setup, or a slight change to how we've done this in the past. Focus peaking sensitivity on the S5 Mark II is the new adopted way of doing this. So it's +2, -2. By default, it's going to come out at 0. Your display colors, they're all combined into one option, so you can just scroll through these, see which color looks best for your eye against the background you're working with, and you have full control over that. Next is display during AFS. This is where if you half press the shutter, you focus while you're in AFS, it will then, once the camera's focused, apply the focus peaking over the frame so that you can confirm again, hey, that is where I want my depth of field to be. That is where I want my focus to be. And then display during MF, we've added some more customization here as to when do you want the focus peaking to show up. While in live view, only while it's in an enlarged display, or only when the shutter is half pressed. So lots of little kind of control to either clean the display up or have it on all the time, depending on what works best for your workflow. Next, we have one area, moving speed. Literally, this is just how fast the selector can move across the frame. That's literally all that's for. So it just lets you pick how quick you want that selector to be moving. Next up, we've got the, so we did that one. Next up, flash modes. Flash modes, really kind of simple and straightforward. Your TTL options, your flash adjust options here. Which synchro do you want to use, first or second? So do you want it to fire first curtain or rear curtain? Auto exposure for it. You've also got wireless controls. So depending on if you're using the FL series flashes from Panasonic, you have the option to come in here and actually fully control them. I believe you also still have the ability to control the pocket wizards through this. If you're someone who does a lot of remote flash work and you're using Pocket Wizard, you could set it up there. This is also where manual flash adjust if you've got one of them attached. And then wireless FP, communication light, and wireless setup. This is if you are using one of our FP flashes or FL flashes to just move the controls into the camera instead of on the flash unit itself. All right, let's run through some of these questions before we wrap up the photo menus here. My S5 Mark II in photo mode, when I lock in preview, the camera is frozen or has a lag. I bought a new fast card, still freezes in preview mode. Does the new upcoming firmware fix it? Well, I wouldn't even know where to start because what you've described, I would need a lot more information to determine where a potential issue would be with the lag or a lockup that you're having on it. So if you can give me a lot more information, what card you're using, what card you're using, are you using genuine batteries, what firmware is your camera on, what lens are you using an adapter, all of that kind of information I need because this is the first I'm seeing that. I don't often see that many problems like that, so if you can describe it much clearer for me, I can try to get you, more information. Let's see here. Cliff says, will Panasonic have any NAB press conferences scheduled soon? No, we don't have any press conferences for NAB. But Matt, Neil, and I will be at the show, and we'll be showing off some cool stuff. So, Cliff, have you played with any new industry products lately? It's definitely trying there, Cliff, aren't you? Trying to get information out of people. Know that Nick, myself, anyone that works with Panasonic or has worked with the products or has access to products early, we're not going to tell you if we've been playing with stuff early. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to actually be able to talk about this stuff because we probably wouldn't be associated with the company anymore. Steve, is there any way to have a button punch in the view like in manual focus, but when in AFC to double check focus? Not that I'm aware of. I do not believe we have punch in while continuous focus, like if you're in stills. There is, if you're in video, you do have manual focus, punch in while recording video, but not necessarily in stills. Mainly because stills is also moving a lot faster than what the video, systems typically are designed for. So, all right, we got 2 pages left. Got some good time left here. So bracketing options on the camera. You've got plenty of bracketing options. You've got white balance bracketing in Kelvin. You've got white balance bracketing for just the basic modes in white balance that you have in the camera. We have focus bracketing built into this camera. This allows you to be able to come in, change the level of stepping that you want the lens to do. So 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest. By default, it's set at 2. You have the image count, so how many photos do you want to actually have this take to go through the full focus range of the lens? And then you also have the sequence. Do you want it to capture from 0, which would be your start point, all the way out? So think of this as 0 is close, plus is further away. Or you can have it set to where it goes 0, which is where you have your focus point set, and then it will go out and then out the other way. So lots of control for this. This can work great for if you're doing like macro work and you want to use a lens to do this. However, remember that macro is a little bit more challenging than that because you typically wouldn't want to use the focusing system to do your bracketing for you because your magnification changes as you actually focus closer. But on lenses that are not necessarily like legitimate or true macro lenses, like the 105 I have attached here, this can be a good way to be able to get your images at least to where you can bring them into a stacking software and kind of correct for it. Nice benefit with our cameras in using focus bracketing is that the S series lenses are designed to have minimal focus breathing. So from what everyone calls as a video focused feature on our lenses, which is no limited focus breathing or no focus breathing, this is actually a highly valuable optic design for photographers as well, because that means that we can have this set up to where you can be using focus bracketing and you don't have to worry about punching into the frame, because by the time you get from near to far in the focus range, you've lost maybe like 2 to 3 millimeters of field of view. Our lenses are designed to minimize that, so you'll be able to actually use pretty much the entire range for that bracket. One of the other, a couple of the other bracketing modes here, you've got aperture bracketing and then as well as exposure bracketing as well. Couple cool things with exposure bracketing is that you do also have the ability to come into the bracketing option, and let me move this down a little bit. So you also have the ability to come in, click on exposure bracketing, and then depending on how you've got your camera set up, so like right now we've got this at 0, but if I turn this to off, because I don't want to use the bracketing that way, if I hit the exposure compensation button on the camera, you'll see that out of the box, it doesn't have anything that, like, there's no other option you can do. You can only adjust your exposure compensation. Well, if I go into my custom menu here, and I know this is a little bit of a deviation to what we were looking at before, but if I go into the custom menu option here, is it custom menu or is it in the photo? Now I'm going to look like a fool because I can't remember where that actually is. Maybe it's under settings. Nope, it's going to be under here. Exposure offset, create a video combined. Why can't I remember where this is? There are too many menu options for me to remember everything anymore. Here it goes, exposure comp dial setting. Under the custom settings, what I was going to get to is that I can come into exposure comp dial setup, cursor buttons up and down. If you change this to this icon, what happens now is when I press the exposure comp button for photo and then I push up on the directional pad, I can cycle through my exposure compensation options, which you can see in the top right or top left that you're looking at on the screen here. So it's a really, really quick way to get in to do exposure compensation settings. Let's see here. I saw a couple more questions come through here. Okay, original batteries, ProGrade 256, 25 megabit V60 lenses, 70-200 Pro LUMIX, 24 1.8, LUMIX body firmware 1.0. First thing I would check is to download the 1.1 firmware, load it on your camera, and see if that changes your issue. Make sure that that memory card is freshly formatted in your camera. If you've put it on if you use it in a different computer, if you've put it on a computer, drag and drop files on and off of it, you typically want to try to, kind of cut out those potential issues first before you start looking at and saying, well, is the camera doing something wrong? Because if the camera's doing what it's supposed to and say, like, maybe the card's file structure is not right, a firmware or a format of the memory card in camera will fix that. The firmware update 1.1 did actually increase responsiveness when it comes to photography side, so I would definitely try that first, and then just try those first, see what happens, and then let kind of keep me updated. Let's see here, where were we? I think we were good. Silent mode. Silent mode on here, literally when you turn silent mode on, it turns off the mechanical shutter. It's electronic only. Flashes won't fire with it. Makes it a totally silent camera. Image stabilizer, you have tons of different options. Depending on the lens that you're working with, you'll see normal, panning, and then off. Typically, I set mine to auto whenever I can, depending on the lens. And then you also have when to activate. Out of the box, the camera's going to be set to half shutter for activating the stabilization on the camera. This is twofold. One, it's a power saving choice. By setting it to half shutter, your stabilization is being locked in the middle and it's not constantly floating. It'll only float when you half press the shutter to focus, and then you'll get a nice stable image out of it. But you do have the ability to come in and change this to auto, or always if you want. Always means that no matter what, when you're looking through the viewfinder, the sensor's floating and correcting against stabilization. The other options in here are all going to be for video. So anamorphic stabilization, boost IS, that stuff's all for the video side of it. So if you're in the photo side, don't worry about those. They're going to have no impact on your stabilization effect for stills. Burst shot settings. This is where you program in the burst mode 1 and burst mode 2 to be able to just say like, hey, I want burst mode 1 to say be my 30 frames per second burst, and I want burst shot 2 to be my high mechanical, depending on just which one you're more comfortable with. By default, these are flipped. It's mechanical is burst 1, electronic 30 frames is burst 2. So yeah, it lets you just kind of, you know, be able to pick which ones you want there. Yeah, total customization there. Sorry, as I was just making sure I didn't miss one of those questions there. Shutter type. You've got a bunch of different options here. You have auto, mechanical, electronic first curtain, electronic shutter, and then electronic with noise reduction now. If you want to use the electronic shutter and you want to be able to do longer exposures than 1 second, because you want to actually be able to apply noise reduction to it, or you just want to run a longer shutter and you don't want any potential shake of a camera from a shutter mechanism closing or anything, you have the ability to come in here, say electronic shutter plus noise reduction, which lets you use electronic shutter for longer exposures. Then we have shutter delay. This is just so if you don't have a remote control, or you don't have the Bluetooth set up on your phone for the Bluetooth remote that comes in the LUMIX Sync app, you can set up to an 8-second delay. EX teleconverter. So this was what someone was asking about before. So electronic teleconverter is, or actually really it's external teleconverter, I believe is what it's originally called. But anyway, EX teleconverter is a way to zoom in, as we say, without deteriorating image quality. So the question that came up before is that if I were to come in here, I'm shooting RAW plus JPEG, and I want to say set my photos to medium or small, you'll see that I can do punch-ins. If I go small, it punches in even further. So this is how you can use the camera from a stills perspective with EX teleconverter turned on and say, hey, I know 12 megapixels is okay, but I want to punch into that frame, get a little bit more reach out of my lens, but know that you are getting a lower resolution image. You are not getting full 24 megapixels. So you see full 24 megapixel, it's 35 millimeter, it's 3x2. If I come in here and I go to EX for M for 12 megapixel, you're roughly at about a Super 35-ish region because you're in 3x2. And then if you go small for 6 megapixel, I'm not 100% sure what this crop is, but it's a tighter crop, as you can see. So you do have a little bit of flexibility here, but you have to remember that, one, this only works if you have the camera set where you are recording a JPEG with the image. If you are only recording RAW, you do not have access to this. This is only going to be in JPEG. And then let's see, what is the last one that was on here? We have time-lapse animation. This is where you can come in and set up your different time-lapse options or your stop-motion options. We've done plenty of videos on these. Take a look at the back catalog. I go through all the details about that. And then self-timer. Self-timer, super, kind of straightforward. You can come into set, you can set up a custom self-timer, however many seconds you want it to go. Do you want it to display the countdown or not? So yeah, just a couple more options added in for the self-timer options on the camera. Outside of that, that pretty much covers. I know that's a lot, and I know it's a lot of me just running through the menus and kind of just, rambling and describing what menus are, but we've gotten so many questions about, hey, what does this option do? How do I change this? Where do I find that? That I felt that it was important for us to kind of just go through, get these 2 streams out of the way, and have these as an archive for everyone to be able to take a look at. So let's take a look at, there were a couple questions that came through and some comments that I want to address, because I've got about another 10 minutes before I have to end the stream today. Nick Driftwood, how's it going, Nick? Says, love to know what setup you're using for shooting bikes in motion. I'm preparing some new custom settings for the GH6 and the S5 Mark II and would love your thoughts. So yeah, we've talked about it a little bit on the streams before. Most of my stuff is in my bag still packed, so I'm not gonna pull it all out yet, but, primary, it's S5 Mark II is what I'm using now for all of the, the motorcycles in motion, for that. In fact, actually, I was just up this weekend doing some more. As far as, setup goes, I use either the 70-200 f4, 70-200 2.8 when I have it, and it's not loaned out. I have used the 70-300 a little bit for it, but I prefer the f4 70-200 personally. It's just a better range for how my brain works for how I want my images framed. But as far as setup for the camera goes, fast motion, stuff like that, I am using typically, let's go to continuous focus. Typically, I have my camera set up in either set 3 or set 4. Usually it's set 4 for the motorcycles and cars. As far as the AF modes go, I am using the One Area Plus with subject detection on typically. And for that, it's usually just human. And then what else do I do? Outside of that, I will use anywhere between mechanical burst or the electronic burst. It kind of just depends on, the particular day. Electronic burst has gotten really, really fast now because we did release the 1.1 firmware for the S5 Mark II. And what that added was a very specific update for stills capture. But I have to remember where it is because I rarely have to come in and change it. Is right here. When you download the firmware 1.1 for the S5 Mark II, we've now added an option here in the menu called AFC Live View that allows you to either give priority to the display quality or the speed at which the viewfinder refreshes and presents the image for continuous AFC shooting. If you were working with version 1.0 and you would notice like, hey, it kind of seems to take a little bit of time for the camera to, from when I half press the shutter to when I click the shutter button to it actually firing and capturing, this directly addresses that. When you download the firmware 1.1, the camera is now set default to speed priority, which means that the image preview in the display is going to be a little bit lower quality so that it can be done a lot faster. This reduces any kind of lag time between acquiring, half pressing the shutter, and then that burst starting to capture. You do have the ability to go back in and change this to image priority, which means that it's going to be a much higher, sharper image quality preview of an image. But you may you may increase the time that it takes from the preview and focus grabbed to when it actually starts capturing the image. So now that we've got the setup for that on the cameras, I make sure that I have it set in speed priority for any of the motorsports that I photograph with the camera. Other than that, my viewfinder, I leave at 60. I get a lot of people say that they want to have, 120 frames per second so that, it's much faster and less, kind of strain on your eye. But truthfully, I don't notice the difference between them. Personally, that's just my own eyesight there. And then what else do I do? As far as the sports or motorsport stuff, I typically will shoot RAW plus JPEG, and I make sure that I have my color profile selected. I'm in love with Velvia 50 running on the standard color profile here. Just because I like the colors, they pop really nice for the JPEGs, and it makes it easy for me to get those images right onto my phone and give them out to the guys and gals that are riding on the streets that we're out at. So, Yeah, that's pretty much my setup. It's super straightforward. I come from a lot more of a traditional mentality of using a camera and the focusing tools that you have in it. I don't let the cameras run, you know, I don't rely on subject detection for the way that I photograph. The reason being is that when you rely on any kind of technology to guess what your intent is, more often than not, you're going to be probably a little disappointed in the results. So I will set the camera to one area or one area plus, like I showed. I will have subject detection on because it's a good aid when it knows where I want it to be activating. Because I will put my focus box where I want my subject to be within the frame. So it makes sure that, like, hey, I always want this in the lower third of the frame. That's where I want my subject to be. Subject detection's turned on because, hey, if it picks up a subject detection on a motorcycle or on a bicycle rider, things like that, awesome. It's just a tool. It's an aid to making sure that the focus is where I want it. And then, yeah, I just kind of just go and shoot. Outside of that, it's all just down to technique. Anyone that has been photographing for a long time, like I mentioned before, the logic of you need fast lenses to be able to get good pictures, it's total bull. That is not true at all. I do not recommend people following that logic. Yes, they are beneficial. Yes, they can help you. But understand the techniques and how to capture a good photo and what goes behind the basic understanding of what makes a good photograph before you start going in and using the crutch of depth of field to make a photo look kind of good. Depth of field is not a kind of magic bullet for making a good photograph. Yes, it looks cool, but it can also be very easily overdone, especially if you're trying to tell a story with an image. So that's my rant on that. Sorry, like I said, that's a hot button topic for me. For the years that I've grown up in this, I've seen us go into this. We need everything, the entire background totally obliterated for it to be good. That's just not true. All right. Could you explain auto exposure in PAS&M? Yes, I can actually. Because I've got more time. As long as y'all are happy with this and you like the stream, I'll keep going for a little bit longer. So PAS&M, program, aperture, shutter, and manual. Auto exposure with these different modes changes just what the priority is given within the exposure triangle. Now, that's an older way of thinking it. It's really not an exposure triangle anymore per se, but at its core, there are three components to exposure: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. And PAS&M are just different ways to look at those three values and give priority to one or the other. In program, the camera is going to try to function fully automatic for you. So it will pick an aperture, a shutter speed, and an ISO, and it will create an exposure. So it's going to look and say, hey, you're using center weighted metering, you are in program, you have auto ISO up to, say, 6400 ISO. I'm going to make this, kind of as good of a photo as I can. And this is the camera thinking, based on those parameters. Most of the time, it's going to try to pick something as close to like 60th of a second for shutter speed. Aperture is going to vary wildly depending on the lens you've got attached to it and the need for it. And in program, don't be surprised if the camera really just shoots the ISO up to 6400 right to the cap and still gives you 60th of a second at f3.5. Because it's looking to try to get you a neutral exposure based on the parameters that you've got provided. Aperture priority literally just says, okay, control all the other settings for me, but aperture is the value that I am going to make as a constant here. 99% of my photography is done in aperture priority because aperture is what I want to control for my depth of field. The other thing is that you now add the ability to do minimum shutter speed in aperture priority mode, which is why I was saying it's not really an exposure triangle anymore, because you've got all these different little caveats that kind of shift the equation and mold it the way that it works for you. So yeah, aperture priority, just think of it as I want to tell the camera what aperture I'm using, and let it figure out the rest. Whether I've got, auto ISO turned on or minimum shutter speed, whatever, it'll just figure the rest of it out. Shutter priority is the reverse of that. It's just saying, hey, I want to shoot at this shutter speed, figure the rest of it out. And then M, full manual, is full manual. I believe now in our cameras, I have to double check this before I say it because, in our cameras, we do have the ability to be in full manual and still set an auto ISO now. So that allows you to just kind of, at your will, pick your ISO and your aperture and shutter speed and just let the ISO be auto for you. You do have a lot of that kind of control there for it. So, let's see here. Hopefully that helped, with PAS or M. Let's see here. What is the difference between on and off for this setting? I think I know what you mean now. Let me remember where that is in the menu. I think that's under a video option. Or no, it's under custom. Okay. So what was actually being referenced, sorry about that. What was actually being referenced is this, auto exposure and PAS or M. All this means is that if you are in the photo PAS or M mode and you click the red recording button, it's going to drop into auto exposure. So basically you have no control over ISO, aperture, shutter speed for the exposure of that video from the photo modes. If you turn this off, the exposure settings that you choose in the PAS or M mode, PAS or M mode, are going to pretty much apply for the video creation. The caveats here will come to shutter speed. Shutter speeds will be forced up to what the minimums are for the different frame rates that you're recording in. That's kind of really what it is. It's designed that you either have the red record button from the photo modes act as like a full auto point and shoot video option, or let it where you are still controlling some of the exposure for that. Sorry I misunderstood the question first off, but hopefully both of the explanations I gave were useful for someone in the chat. Let's see here. Sean asks, can you download other profiles like Velvia? I'm using profiles that are based from The Art of Photography, so Ted Forbes. Definitely check his stuff out. He's got catalogs for Lightroom and Photoshop and stuff like that are presets that you can load in. I have converted ones for .cube files that I loaded into the camera and I've been playing around with. They've just been super fun to work with. I love the color I get out of them. Cliff says, can you tell us more about the L2 image processor? Why is it better than previous? Can it process 8K video? If you want to learn about L2, take a look at the ad material and the stuff that we've posted on the LUMIX global accounts, Cliff. Unfortunately, there's not much else I can tell you at this point. There's not actually a lot more that I honestly know enough to explain. So, let's see here. 1.1 firmware is done and all working fine now. How can I do half press for focus before shooting? It's not in default. Half press for focusing? I mean, it should be by default. If for some reason it's not, you would go into the settings here, go to the... Well, no, it should just be by default. I will have to look a little bit further in on that for you, Amit, and then I'll be able to get you some more answers there. Video question, can you explain the HLG mode? I will have to table that one for the stream when we come back from NAB, but we will talk about HLG around that point. Basically, a very quick overview, hybrid log gamma or HLG is an industry standard recording color profile and transform that basically says if I take an HLG encoded video and play it on a standard dynamic range display, it will clip highlights at this particular point and it will roll them off to where they're supposed to be. But I can also take that exact same piece of video, put it on an HDR graded display that is HLG compatible, and it will know how to map the highlights properly for how much dynamic range that display can provide. That's the very basic concept of HLG video. Cool. Okay, with that, I do have to call it. We're about 25 minutes past the hour, so thank you everybody so much for tuning in and your questions, and hopefully we were able to get you some information. Hopefully we were able to answer some questions for you, and just provide some good info on what the camera system's menus are from the photography perspective, and where you can find them, how to use them, so on and so forth. As a reminder, next week's stream on the 13th will be a pre-recorded stream. It's already up online. Go take a look, click the reminder bell on it, subscribe to the channel, like the videos, all that kind of stuff. It helps us get better. Reach out to there to get more people in here that may want to hear this kind of stuff. But yeah, that video's up. That will premiere at 1 p.m. Central Time, or 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Next Thursday, so be sure to check that out. We're going to be talking all about the LUTs for photography, so using the real-time LUT, by extension, the real-time LUT functionality, but in the photography sense. So I walk you through all that. Go take a look at it. The following week will be a video that we're recording during NAB while Matt, Neil, and I are out there, so that video will actually get posted later in the week because we actually have to be there to record it. And then, yeah, we'll be back live the following week, which I believe is the 27th. And we'll be rounding out this month. Hopefully, if the weather is holding at the end of this month, I want to do a stream from actually out in the field. So, yeah, definitely join us for that. Otherwise, if you like the video, if you like this stream, this conversation, hit the like button. It helps me greatly in improving and bringing more of these out. And just, you know, kind of, honestly, it also just helps know that y'all like this stuff and you want to hear more. Outside of this, subscribe to the channel if you don't already. I know actually a lot of you are subscribed. We do tend to actually skew very heavy towards subscribers for the live broadcast part. Remember to keep your camera firmwares updated. We did just release firmware 1.1 for the S5 Mark II, so get that downloaded. I will drop the link in the chat right now. Quickly, Steve asks, where's the best place to file a bug? Once this video is posted, just drop it in the comments, because I'll see them, and we moderate the comments for language. Just because we kind of have to. So I'll see it and I'll be able to report it in there. Or you can email lumixlive@us.panasonic.com. That also comes up at the end card for this. Yeah, other than that, I think I've rambled the ending on long enough. So thanks everybody. I hope you have an awesome rest of your weekend. I hope you're all staying dry as we are just in the middle of torrential downpour here in Texas. Yeah, get out there, create some cool stuff, follow us on socials, show us all your work. And yeah, we'll see you all next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, here on YouTube. Later, everybody.